Welcome to Speaking in Spoons with your host, Christina Brookman.
Hi, welcome to Speaking in Spoons, a chronically ill podcast. I am your host, Christina Brookman, and today we are talking about rethinking accessibility. We have with us a very special guest, Charlie Tripplet, who is the Director of Accessibility Ops for NBC Universal. Hi,
Hey.
Charlie.
Hi, thanks for having me. This is great. I really appreciate the offer to come on the show and chat for a little while.
Thank you so much for being here. I've loved following you on LinkedIn. You always have intriguing posts. And so I'm very grateful for you coming here today. Um, could you tell our audience a little bit about yourself and your relationship to assistive technology?
Of course. I generally describe myself as a UX engineer who, for most of his career, was focused on SEO, performance, conversion optimization, those sorts of spaces where I really wanted to build high-performing websites that just helped people solve their own problems and, made really good business sense for whatever organization I was with. Um, but I have gradually steered my career towards accessibility. So that's who I am at work. In the rest of my life, I am living here in Seattle, about to move to New York City. And my wife and I enjoy being outdoors. I enjoy a sport called canyoning, which is a lot of rope skills and swift water in here in Washington. And I'm going to be missing that a little bit in New York City. Um, but my journey into assistive technology was a little bit different than many folks' journey into accessibility. Many people come into the space because of a personal experience or because of someone who is in their life who is experiencing barriers or experiencing disabilities. And my journey was much more around my professional work. I was fortunate enough to have somebody working for me during my time at the university who became very, very interested in digital accessibility. And their work in that space dragged me into this space and kind of radicalized me and showed me that the things that I was seeking, that I was looking for ways to make our web properties faster, more search engine optimized, and just more insightfully innovative for everybody. The answers to all of that were waiting for me in digital accessibility and removing barriers for people with disabilities. So now I have been very fortunate to be able to take this approach to the enterprise level. During my time here in Seattle, especially, I got to do that full time as like my real gig and not just like my UX engineer slash accessibility person. And
It's exciting.
now I'm getting to take that to a bigger stage.
What do you look I have so many questions in all of that. It's exciting. Particularly, you talked about websites and website accessibility. Um, have you seen in the growth of website accessibility? Um, and where do you think the future lies for that? And that may be a loaded question.
So you've asked a really good question. If you look around at the accessibility space, you see a lot more people adding, dash or slash accessibility expert to their job title. And that's really encouraging that so many designers and developers and QA testers, even some product owners are at least aware that accessibility exists. They've had some sort of formal training, perhaps. So it feels like when you look at people who are talking about accessibility or people who are in the design and dev space, that things are getting better. However, we know from surveys that are conducted by, companies like WebAIM or Level Access that really things are not getting that much better. In fact, just because there are so many more websites being produced every day that are inaccessible, the net accessibility score, if you can imagine such a thing, is probably constantly getting worse, despite more and more
Believe
people
that.
being aware of accessibility.
Yeah, I can believe that from my own personal experience as my problems with my eyes have gotten worse. Uh, I have noticed visual inaccessibility that I didn't notice before. Um, when they talk about accessibility for websites, what does that include to you?
So when someone says that they have accessibility experience or they are an accessibility expert, I, that's amazing. That's wonderful that you know that accessibility exists. And if they are a designer, I always kind of wonder how deep that connection to the space goes. Because it's, I think, very easy for designers to learn a little bit about color contrast and maybe color blindness, but then they get really obsessed with other parts of digital accessibility that they really don't have much control over. And I also ask, like, wonder, do they know much about how code actually affects the user experience? Because here's the thing, designers kind of sometimes, especially at large enterprises where you have very, uh, you know, complex workflows, there's kind of a tendency to throw the design over the wall to the developers. And the problem with that is that the code is the UX for people who are using assistive technology, right? The code is actually the user experience for someone using the keyboard or the screen reader. Um,
And
so
the
that's
UX is the user experience,
Oh,
just to be
yes.
clear.
So yeah, so and I find myself saying this a lot actually in design reviews, reminding everyone that UX stands for the user experience. And we're here reviewing the user interface, which is the pretty picture we've produced of what we want this website or native app on iOS or Android to look like. But we also have to think about, especially in the accessibility space, what the full user experience is going to be. And that's not just affected by this pretty picture we've produced that looks like a web page. That is deeply affected by the decisions that the developers make as well. So I view accessibility as a very large, holistic enterprise that you have to take on, and think as a systems level thinker. So here's one thing I didn't mention about myself earlier. My background in college is actually design. I have a bachelor's of fine arts in design. I didn't learn to become a coder until much, much later in my career. And what design teaches you to do, or what a good design program teaches you to do, is think at systems level. You aren't just thinking about, we're doing this one-off thing, and then tomorrow we're doing a one-off thing. You're thinking about the whole ecosystem of experiences that you want people to have.
Right.
So I don't so that's what I'm always looking for. That's what I'm always hoping people mean when they put accessibility in their job title or their job description of who and what they are in the workplace, is they are a systems thinker and they're thinking about not just their little slice of the pie, but they're also understanding how all of these things interact to create a good user experience for people at the other end.
So when you're coding, like, and you're thinking of the full system, what that sounds, it sounds like you get a delight out of doing it, but it also sounds very challenging. Are there certain things you think of most of when you're looking at the system to make sure of the user experience? Like how specifically could coding, for people that don't know coding or anything like that, how would coding affect them and their disability?
Yeah. So once we get into assistive technology, so when I say assistive technology, I am generally talking about, well, okay, most people, when they say assistive technology, they're talking about keyboard or screen reader users, or they're talking about people who are using switch devices, which are kind of akin to like a game controller. They're often very highly customized and let someone with severe motor disabilities operate their whole machine. Now, the way those technologies are affected by code is, I think, one of the most exciting parts about what I get to do in the accessibility space, because I love writing as little code as possible. That's that's what I really enjoy, is I want so little code to be delivered to everybody's computer, because the best code is the fastest code is the code that isn't there. This is where I get back to the performance engineer part of me. And honestly, the same is true when we're talking about accessibility. And so if you know how to code using what we call semantic markup, so code, the best way I can describe it is code kind of has a grain to it, like wood grain. So if anyone has ever done woodworking, when you are cutting or sanding or carving wood, you try to do so in the direction of the wood grain, because if you don't do that, your product is not going to come out as smooth and polished as you'd like. Code is very much the same way. If you are trying to code in ways that are not compliant, that go against the grain of what the requirements are, you end up adding more and more and more code to it. In the same way that if you were, trying to make a bench, but you kept cutting across the grain and sanding across the grain, you have to add more and more layers of
Yeah,
lac in order to actually get that polish that you're looking for. And you end up with something that is heavier, not as elegant, and honestly isn't going to last as long
yeah.
as the more elegant solution would have. So for me, code is about writing minimalistic, elegant code that delivers the most value to the customer. And when you do that, when you use what we generally call semantic markup, or compliant markup, whether you're on the web or whether you're writing an iOS or an Android app, you end up with oftentimes a very, very accessible product just by coding correctly in the first place.
That makes sense. I mean, I for those listening with disabilities and chronic illnesses, a lot of times, sometimes we're put on medications, and then you have to take a medication for that medication or a surgery, and then you're piling up and piling up instead of the clean and elegant solution to begin with. I like those words. Uh, on LinkedIn, you said that in regards to people that were visually impaired and blind, and visually impaired or blind, that we should rethink how we educate people about assistive technology. And I'd love for you to elaborate on that.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot. So, a very common approach to introducing digital product teams, so the people who are designers and developers, the people who manage these products and websites that get put out, at some point they all get introduced to accessibility. And a very common pattern for doing that is showing off assistive technology. And the first thing that often gets shown off and demoed for them is a screen reader. For good reason. I mean, it's a powerful piece of technology. So a screen reader reads what's happening on screen to someone who can't see it. There are other people who use screen readers for other purposes, but largely we're talking about people who are blind or very, very low vision and just can't see what's happening on their screen. So they rely on their computer telling them what's on screen through these applications.
Right.
And screen readers are an impressive technology. However, what tends to happen is that people get really fixated on this idea of like, okay, well, we have to make sure that our app works for screen readers. But really, that's something that happens at that elegant code stage. That has more to do with the developer writing really good, clean, elegant code. And there are 1,000 things that happen before we get to that step. So, what the problem with that is that because we feel like we're doing a good job for screen reader, we ignore every other disability that
Mhm.
we need to account for in design. So because we know that we're handling screen reader stuff, we're all over that, but we don't stop to think about how do we create our design system in such a way that it works for people with low vision who are just bumping up the text size on their phone. Because at least 50% of the population is going to be doing that soon if you look at demographics.
Yeah.
I have reached the magical age of my mid to late 40s, and I had to increase the font size on my phone, but I would not say that I have a disability. I just couldn't read my texts. Okay. But I'm using assistive technology settings on my device. I do the same thing on my desktop machine. So I'm sitting here looking at I think it's like a 23-inch 5K monitor, super crisp, but I still like the text to be just a little bit bigger. Not every design system or design accounts for that. So if I'm just making the text a little bit bigger, does that blow out some of the UI components and now the web page or the app looks broken? It's very common for that to be
I've been
the case.
having that problem so much. So thank you for talking about this because like with the zooming or color contrast and then it doesn't apply when I go to a different website or my email and
Mhm.
I need the larger font but I also have a tracking disorder. So then I'm just like I can't see anything. So please continue. I was just excited.
Yeah, well, and here's so one of the ways that I try to teach accessibility to digital product teams so that it sticks is that we're not just doing this for people with disabilities. Because here's the cool thing. If you make sure that your web app or your iOS or Android app allow for people to increase the font size by up to 200%, like you're supposed to,
Mhm.
you've also accounted for internationalizing your app. So let's say you go from English to French translation for localization efforts. French is just a lot more wordy, okay? It's like 25 to 30% bigger than English in the way that things get spelled out. And so you will have accounted for that if you account for dynamic text sizing. Okay, that's great. If we have this sequence that we're thinking through our design, starting with low vision, and then we work our way up to through other disabilities like, uh, speech disabilities or speech recognition. We're providing alternatives to calling customer service. We're doing things like thinking about people who just need a larger target size. So when I say target size, buttons on your phone need to be a certain size to make them, one, easier to see, but also for people who have a hard time pressing things with precision,
Mhm.
that's huge for them to have great big buttons that are easy to find, easy to tap. Um, but again, these are all things that build on top of each other. And we haven't even started talking about assistive technology yet. We go through a lot of design process before we get to even starting to talk about keyboard or switch devices or screen readers. Now, here's the cool thing. In creating accommodations and affordances for people with low vision, cognitive, speech, hearing, we do all of these things. We make the product better for everybody. And working this sequence all the way up to screen readers and keyboard and switch devices, it lays the right foundation so that when we get to screen readers, we're also accounting for people with intersectional disabilities. So, you can have more than one disability at a time. Like that's legal. They let you do that. And so we've also accounted for, people with, that might be experiencing multiple barriers, and we've removed those. This is what I've been writing about and thinking about a lot in our approach to making software accessible. And this has largely come, I think, from people like me who also used to go in and demo a screen reader and look at this incredible technology. And isn't that exciting? And don't you want to think about this? Because it does wow people to start off at that incredible technology level. But it's not exactly actionable, and just only thinking about that doesn't allow us to accommodate all of the other disabilities that we need to accommodate. Color perception is one that I see all the time of, if you are colorblind, I think you can correctly identify something like 4 colors out of 24 color crayon box. Uh,
Wow, that's
I
important.
And so imagine what that's like coming to an application where it uses, say, like colors to indicate, status of, say, your order. Has it shipped? Well, that's, red, or green. Or if it's like pending, maybe that's yellow. Or maybe there's some sort of problem with your shipment that's red. Well, if you have red-green color blindness, you do not understand what is happening with your shipment.
Can't see it.
Right.
I
And
never
so
thought that. Wow.
Right. And so the way that we accommodate that is we use our words instead of trying to use colors or just merely icons. We use our words. You can write the word, pending or shipped or
Right.
paused. But when we use our words, we make something everybody can understand. We don't have to rely on some obscure icon or some color, and it just makes a better experience for everybody by accommodating people with differences of color vision. So, working this sequence before we get to screen readers is really, really powerful. I've seen teams do it, and it works out really, really well. They end up making the best product they possibly could for everybody because they've gained all of these insights about the product along the way.
That's incredible. Is it now here's the question that I often wonder, and I often like as a member of the disability community, I hear a lot like, well, we have to include everybody, everything has to be inclusive. But I also recognize, and I truly believe that we should try, but I wonder if it is possible to truly accommodate everybody in every single thing. So how do you feel about that with technology? Is this we're leading that if you break it down from the simplicity at the beginning, it is more likely to accommodate and be accessible for everyone?
So it's been said that the World Wide Web and HTML is the most accessible communications platform mankind has ever invented. It literally beams in structured information into anyone's device. Are there situations you can get into where like, hey, this is not accessible? So recently I was working with a company that was very reliant on charts and graphs and pictures of maps to communicate information. Okay. And they were pulling their hair out saying, well, how are we going to make this accessible to people who are blind using a screen reader? I had to stop them and say, hey, we can't heal the blind here. That's not what we can do. You're asking the wrong question. The question is not how do we make the map accessible? The question is how do we convey the information that this map contains in another way? Okay. So what is the point of this map, or what is the information this map contains? How do we display this in another way? So what I find is that the argument that we can't make everything accessible is usually coming from asking the wrong question. Um, I very rarely come across things that like there is just no way that we could pull this off. So let me come at this from a different perspective. So I help teach a outdoor swiftwater canyoning course here in Washington. I'm very sad that I won't be able to do that this year, but you might say that, okay, well, rappelling into swiftwater canyons and negotiating waterfalls and deep, ice cold pools, that's definitely not something that someone with, say, a severe motor disability would be able to handle. And yet, we actually plan for that eventuality because what happens in the canyon is people get hurt. So I know people who have broken a leg or blown out an ankle or hurt their arm, and we have to be able to navigate that person through the canyon so that we can escape the canyon.
Mhm.
So even in these places where you say, well, obviously that's not for someone with a disability, uh, it has to be because that sort of entry could suddenly give someone a temporary disability that we now have to deal with. So I don't buy a lot of arguments that we can't make everything accessible.
But that goes
There
back
are,
to that system view that you think of, like thinking like back in design of thinking of like the whole before you go into something, thinking of that, pre-planning and thinking of, well, like you said, someone could get temporarily disabled in the
Mhm.
canyon.
Right. And I do talk about this a little bit with teams, and just remind them that like we all experience disabilities. It doesn't matter if you're like this young 22-year-old person that I work with that's like designing things. And so it's really hard to explain to them that, hey, we need to make the type bigger. Why? I can see it. Okay, you can see it because you're 22 years old. You can see everything. That's awesome, but not everybody can. Um, I I try to walk people through different scenarios. So my favorite is maybe you have been taking some cold meds that are making you groggy. You're sleepy, you're tired, you don't have a ton of patience, you're kind of in a bad mood because you have cold. You kind of have a temporary cognitive disability at this moment. Your processing power to solve problems, to remember things is not what it normally is. And your ability to be patient with a slow website or with a process that takes too many steps is significantly reduced. So, people who work in the digital space are often kind of intimidated or scared by thinking about assistive technology or accessibility or people with disabilities because it seems scary to them and they just don't want to make a mistake.
Right.
And obviously, I need to say this because I know some people get upset by this. Obviously, having a temporary or situational disability is completely different from having a permanent or complete disability. Obviously, that's different. But for the purposes of getting into someone's head and making them stop and think for a second about like, okay, well, how can I wrap my head around uh, designing this and thinking about this workflow in this iOS app and simplifying it and making it so that I don't have to go hunt for information or remember what I put in the last screen
Hmm.
goes a long way towards getting us that foundation we're looking for so that when someone is using this application with a screen reader and for them referencing information from another screen or from another source is especially more difficult. We've just solved a whole host of problems for people who might not who would say they don't have a disability. They're just,
Right.
this allergy med is just really messing with me today.
But it does, like, I mean, disability affects everybody at some point in their life. Um, even like as you said, through aging. Um, uh, So as you said, you're going into a new job, and
Yeah.
this is a new, uh, are you transitioning into a new way of, I'm having trouble finding my words, but what I'm trying to say is, could you explain how how you're transitioning into this new position, and what will be changing in what you do with assistive technology, or if it's not?
See, let me think about the best way to explain this. So so yeah, I'm really excited about this step. Most of my time in accessibility has spent just kind of being the go-to expert, the kind of on-hand consultant for accessibility, working with other designers and developers and product managers and leadership and doing a lot of like keynote style talks on accessibility, which I love, despite the fact that I'm an introvert, but that's a story for another day. There is a great deal of fun working in that space and seeing people's eyes light up when they come to understand that, hey, you just helped me write a lot less code that does exactly the thing that I want it to do and is accessible and it's faster. Or working with the designers and helping them see that, hey, by designing this layout for people with low vision, we actually made a UI or user interface that's going to sell more devices or whatever it is we're trying to do. If we're looking for like email signups or whatever it is, the numbers are going to go in the right direction because we stop for a second to consider how someone with low vision, they might be using a magnification tool that allows them to zoom way, way in on their screen. Okay. Can I still navigate this thing? That is super fun. The role that I'm moving into is more of a global enterprise operations sort of role, where my understanding of how things actually get made. So the people who make stuff and what are their processes like. I've spent several years trying to optimize the way that we introduce accessibility into the work. The work is what matters. And so many people in the accessibility space really try to focus on making everybody that works there an accessibility expert or making sure that we have a culture of accessibility. I don't know what that means. Okay. I don't know how to measure that. I don't know. I mean, there are ways you can pretend like you're measuring that, but culture or empathy or things like that don't change the way people work. And I have repeatedly seen that if you want to change the way people think, you have to change the way that people work. And the way you change the way people work is you give them tools in the way that they do their job already, and that will change the way they work, the way they think, and get you the results that you want. So that's what I'll be bringing with me to New York is this ability to study and understand processes. And rather than layering accessibility on top of all the other complex things that teams already do on a tight deadline with no budget, with intense pressure to succeed and get the results they're looking for. You can't really throw another requirement on top of that is ambiguous. You have to incorporate it into the way they work. You have to make accessibility the path of least resistance to getting their job done. And that's what I will be helping advise on how to do that across many different divisions and departments and groups within a much bigger global company. I'm really excited about that.
That's exciting. That's really exciting. So with moving into this new position and everything you've done, and um, where do you get excited looking at the future of assistive technology?
So when I look at the future of what's going on in assistive technology and the accessibility space, everybody is talking a lot about AI. I don't know that I appreciate or see that future quite the same way everyone else does.
Right.
So I think there is a certain amount of promise in using AI. I mean, really, we're talking about LLMs or machine learning to interpret websites that are not accessible and operate them where the designers and developers have failed. But that will never be a perfect system. It will always kind of be like an assistant that is reinterpreting a poorly made website. I
Right.
think that those are tools, and I've seen a few of them that are out there where people are experimenting in this space. I think that will be a good hack um, for folks who need to access content. Um, and I don't know that I'm excited about that. I just see that as, okay, this is going to remove some barriers for people in a very synthetic way. It's kind of like the equivalent of adding a wheelchair ramp to the front of an old building, right? You didn't
Right.
make the building accessible. You added an accessory that, covers up some stairs. Whereas, being the designer and developer that I am, I want to burn the whole thing down and start over.
Start over.
Um, in terms of accessibility, I think the things that excite me are that kind of the old guard of accessibility space of auditing a web page or an application and finding all the things wrong with it. Maybe we find like 500 issues with this website. And then we turn that spreadsheet of problems over to the company and expect them to remediate it, which is very expensive and very time consuming. And I don't know what percentage of the time, don't have that kind of data, but maybe they get 20% of those things fixed over the course of the next year. I'm seeing that people are recognizing that's not getting us where we want to go. That there is a greater and greater emphasis on, hey, we need to understand the way software actually gets built and incorporate accessibility into that rather than a bolt-on process at the end. Um, People have been saying that for a long time, but they often don't know really what that means because software is most of it is produced nowadays using what's called an agile methodology, which has very elaborate and specific ceremonies and meetings and processes that every piece and every decision of that software goes through. And if you're not incorporating what you're doing as an accessibility expert into those ceremonies and processes, it's not enough just to say, well, we need to think about accessibility at the start, because the start is much, much sooner than you think with Agile. The start is not at the design. The start is not at the beginning where people are starting to write code. It's many, many layers above that. Seeing more people get on board with that idea, I think is very exciting. And I think that's coming from software engineers who are coming into the accessibility space, who understand the nuts and bolts of how things get built. Those are things that I think are exciting and going to, to some degree change the market. Um, but I don't know what's going to make the sea change occur. But I know what excites me in like small ways in the space.
You kind of read my mind when you brought up finances. I'm sure there's lots of companies that worry trying to make things accessible will cost more money. Is What would you say to them about that?
So there are varying ideas about this. That, some people kind of come up with this percentage formula that making software accessibility from the beginning costs you, let's say like 2% more. But your savings, because you're now not going back to remediate things, is huge. So I think that um, that's a fair way to look at it if you assume that it takes longer to do accessibility. Um,
Okay.
but I don't believe that's true because what I see happening is when designers go through that sequence of designing for low vision and working their way up to assistive technology, they make decisions faster. Uh, they make good decisions faster, I should say.
Right.
Because you know that if I have made this work for people with low vision, I have also made this work for people who, just want to bump up their text size a little bit, or people who are outdoors and are using their phone in the bright sunshine by making things higher contrast. Um, you get a lot of bad ideas out of the way when you remove barriers for people with disabilities. I don't know how else to describe it. It's like,
No, that's great. I think that's a great thing to say to company. Like in the long run, it saves them, is
right,
what I'm hearing from
yeah.
you. Um,
And a lot of software gets hung up on the UX research stage. And so what that often, I mean, different companies have different ideas of what they consider user experience research. Unfortunately, for a lot of companies, what that means is that, like, well, we have three different designs and we're not sure which one we should go with. So we're going to run each of them by 12 people and let them tell us what they think,
right.
which is not UX research. That's, you can test information. Like, I could get on a soapbox and we could have a whole podcast about that. But essentially, if I am designing for people with disabilities and removing barriers from them, I probably am not going to have three different concepts of what this UI can look like. I have made decisions so quickly and so firmly that I know where I want to go with this. And you might still do user research, but that user research is only going to confirm the insights that you gained by designing to remove barriers. So again, we shouldn't skip the step of UX research, but we can make it go by a lot faster by understanding what we're getting from it.
Yeah.
So I argue the opposite. I think that focusing on accessible first design gets us where we want to go faster. Because if we can speed up the process and make decisions more quickly, not only are we saving money, but we're also not going to go through that horrible remediation and audit process later, because we've solved the problems up front and we made a better product for all of our customers, which means we're making more money, we're getting more signups, we're getting
Right.
better consumption, we're getting all those other things that we want to.
Yeah.
So that's to say, I don't think that, like, oh, the 2% is wrong. I think it's like an overestimate. I think it's conservative.
Okay. Um, uh, One final question. Um, uh, we've had, I was just curious about, do you think that with the elimination of DEI, that is going to impact the assistive technology accessibility um, community or areas of companies?
Unfortunately, in some places, accessibility has been rolled into DEI departments. And why do I say unfortunately? It's clear that there is a portion of business leadership that looks at DEI as optional. And accessibility is not optional, it's a functional requirement. It is the law. And so, like, I can't tell you how inclusive your website is to some particular social minority. I can't tell you how inclusive your website is to women. I can't tell you how inclusive your website is to, any particular group. But I can tell you how accessible it is, and I can measure that, and I can, give you exact fixes on what to do there. So, what I have always taught teams to do in the accessibility space is that DEI is like your close partner for sure. But accessibility shouldn't really be wrapped up in that. Accessibility is usually better served in like a legal division or engineering type division.
Okay.
And the reason for that is simply because it's a functional requirement, not not some sort of inclusion measure. Now, does inclusion include accessibility and making your company, making everybody feel welcome in that space? Of course it does. So where I think that where I've seen it affecting companies is where accessibility was wrapped up in DEI, those people have either had their funding cut, they've experienced some layoffs, but in other companies, they split them off and they're really trying to focus on accessibility while dumping their DEI efforts, which is
Okay.
interesting. So
Yeah.
it's a real mixed bag right now, of what's happening and where it's all going to end up. I really don't know. But I would say it's overall not helping. If
Yeah.
that's 1,000 words to say, generally it's not helping. But maybe keeping the two separate is a better approach.
That, thank you for offering that insight because I think, and I didn't realize initially that all of those things were wrapped up in DEI. So when DEI gets cut, like it's this impact. Uh, I can't thank you enough for coming on today. This has been just an absolute delight. I've learned so much, and I know that our listeners and viewers have too. Um, do you have any final thoughts you would like to leave them with?
Yes, it's the same thing I think I close every podcast with. Become ungovernable. That is that is the thing that we need right now. Be a person who is unwilling to be stamped out or pushed aside, or set in the background. We need to, in so many of our spaces, just be ungovernable.
Agree, 100%. Thank you. Um, and to everybody listening, stay tuned. I'll be releasing some information for upcoming podcasts. I know I've been on hiatus, but as Charlie said, stay ungovernable and also save your spoons. And check out our website because we will have Charlie's bio on that as well. So you can learn more information and you just need to write a book. That's what I'm saying. Write a book. um, and save your spoons.
If you want to contact us, please send a DM or email to speakinginspoons@gmail.com with any stories you have or would like to interview with us on any of our upcoming topics. And check out our website for all of our upcoming episodes and what's happening in the Speaking in Spoons community at www.speakinginspoons.com. Thank you for listening to Speaking in Spoons, and have a great day.